Angela Rayner's proposed Council on Islamophobia, with its aim of creating an official definition and tackling anti-Muslim discrimination, is an ambitious and a well-meaning initiative. Yet, any attempt to confront religious prejudice in Britain is doomed to failure unless we first address the appalling state of religious education in our schools. And without a proper understanding of faiths, their histories and their core texts, we risk fostering ignorance, which in turn breeds fear and division. A striking example of this educational deficit emerged just recently when a university student and a potential candidate for political office asked me whether Christianity, Islam, and Judaism worship the same God. The question, innocent enough, is indicative of a far deeper problem. Our comparative religious educational model is failing. And you might say, oh, it's not a comparative religion. It is, in all but name. Schools teach religion through a comparison of differing rites of passage and superficial comparisons, baptism, bar mitzvah, shahada, without providing the theological, historical, textual grounding necessary to understanding these faiths properly and to enjoying the diversity. The result is an incoherent approach that fosters neither intellectual engagement nor genuine respect. And when there are visual aids and computer screens in almost every classroom, it is nonsense not to have sort of a direct insight into, what is it like to enter a mosque? What is it like to enter a church? What is the difference between the between the Orthodox churches and the Catholic churches, or the Anglican churches, or the Lutheran churches? What is it like to enter a synagogue? All of these things can actually be demonstrated on video. The default model of religious education in Britain has long been one of superficial parallelism, drawing neat equivalences between confirmation and circumcision, marriage rites and funeral practices. While these rites have cultural and spiritual significance, they don't teach students why these traditions exist or how they relate to the core beliefs of each faith. This approach is both patronizing and ineffective, reducing religion to a list of exotic customs rather than engaging with the intellectual traditions that underpin them. I remember talking to Rabbi Aryeh Forta years and years ago in the 1990s about how to teach a core subject about Judaism, and this was about a GCSE course, and even that was basically predicated on parallelism and on a series of rites of passage, without getting into the core meaning. Religious literacy requires more than a checklist of rituals. It necessitates an engagement with texts, ideas, historical development, walking through the environment. And we can do that with video. We can do that with AI. Without using modern technology, we're producing generations of students who at best see faith as a set of customs on a piece of paper, and at worst remain entirely ignorant of the traditions that shape the world around them. And what they're learning is words which are incomprehensible. This ignorance allows prejudice to fester. If one cannot distinguish between religious doctrine and cultural practice, how can one hope to differentiate criticism of faith from outright bigotry? Angela Rayner's government, in establishing this council, must tread carefully. It's something that I was trying to set up in the about 10 years ago, when I had the opportunity of standing for political office, and I remember talking to religious MPs and candidates of differing religious backgrounds, and particularly thinking, what we need is an Islamic, a secular Islamic council of people who who are engaged in politics, who can put forward, who can communicate what it means to be a Muslim, but to extend that as well to Christianity, to Islam, to Hinduism, to all faiths, and to none. What does it mean to be an atheist in the modern world, and why that is also important? The definition of Islamophobia proposed by the All-Party Parliamentary Group in 2018, Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness, has been both widely adopted and widely criticised. Critics argue that it risks stifling legitimate criticism of Islam as a religion, potentially acting as a blasphemy law by stealth. I'm always interested when people like Boris talks about letterboxes and stuff, and ridicules the veil, the hijab. And what I routinely do is point people to an icon, often which I carry in my pocket, of the Virgin Mary in the Orthodox tradition, because she is veiled. Long before Islam emerged, the tradition of veiled women was the practice in the late Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. Long before. This is a cultural trait, and something that Islam, of course, picked up in its pursuit of modesty. It's something that, incidentally, is also picked up with a different expression in particularly Orthodox Judaism, and, of course, in Hinduism. But the council, now reportedly to be chaired by the former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, will have to find a balance between tackling genuine anti-Muslim hatred and preserving freedom of speech. And opposition voices such as Robert Jenrick's have already sounded the alarm, and they argue that further legislation is unnecessary since existing laws already prohibit discrimination and hate crimes, and I'm inclined to agree. What is needed is not further legislation, but better education. More concerningly, they warn that the vague definition could be weaponized to suppress discourse rather than encourage dialogue. The recent case of a man prosecuted for burning a Quran, along with past incidents like the Batley teacher forced into hiding for showing an image of Muhammad in class, only adds to these fears. If the government is serious about tackling religious intolerance, it must first ensure that people understand religion in the first place. Religious education in schools needs to be transformed from a perfunctory exercise in multiculturalism into a robust intellectual discipline. This means we need to have a text-based approach. Students should engage with the key scriptures, with passages from the Torah, from the Bible, from the Quran, and from other religious texts, not merely as sacred texts, but as an historical and a philosophical basis that has shaped civilizations. We, in the Western world, we are as much indebted to Islam as we are to the Judeo-Christian traditions. Our mathematics is defined by words of Arabic origin. Algebra, algorithm. It's madness to think that our Western world is entirely Christian. It's madness. And Thomas Aquinas was drawing on philosophical traditions that have been developed in the Islamic world. Teaching must replace religious movements, must place religious movements within their historical settings, explaining doctrinal developments, schisms, the interactions between faiths. Children should come out of school knowing about the Reformation, knowing about the difference between selective denominations in Christianity, knowing about the rise of Sunni and Shia Islam, maybe even about the rise of the Baha'i tradition, or the influence of Hellenistic thought on Judaism. These things should not be ignored. The influence of Hellenistic thought on Judaism is the basis of Hanukkah. And yet we teach Hanukkah without talking about the Hellenistic impact on Judaism and the development of the Septuagint and so on. We have to avoid the fallacy that all faiths are the same. While many religions share ethical similarities, their theological claims differ significantly, and teaching must respect these distinctions rather than smoothing them over in a well-meaning but misleading attempt to provide some sort of harmony. And many educators themselves lack the adequate training in religious studies. Many educators who are teaching religion have come through one particular religious background, and however fondly they embrace this multicultural teaching system, they are inadvertently doing a sort of parallelism and a comparison. This is why this tradition is not as good as mine, and it becomes a sort of it becomes a class about indoctrination, religious training. That's not what religious education is about. Religious education is about understanding the cultural beliefs that underpin the development of our society. It's both historical and it's social. And it might even be artistic. It's a very broad base. I also think it happens to be dramatic as well, and musical. Angela Rayner's initiative may stem from good intentions, but it will be ineffective unless it is underpinned by a more informed and educated public. Tackling Islamophobia, or indeed any form of religious prejudice, cannot be done solely through government councils and legal definitions. It requires a fundamental shift in how we teach religion in Britain. And until then, we will continue to see well-intentioned efforts undermined by ignorance, suspicion, and misunderstanding. I'm hoping, I'm at the moment negotiating and hoping to be making documentaries about religion, about history, about art, which I hope will contribute to this sort of discussion, but without a fundamental change in the way that we look at education. Angela Rayner is simply barking, and if a university student, if a potential candidate for a political party can still ask whether the Abrahamic faiths share the same God, then we have so much work to do. And the answer to that is one sentence: of course they do. They share the same God. And when you, and the follow-up question might be, well, why does a Muslim refer to God as Allah? Because that happens to be the word for God in Arabic. And if you go to a Christian church, if you go to a church in Gaza, maybe go to the same church that Pope Francis talks to every evening, you will hear they refer to God as Allah. And you know, this is about translation. This is about language. It's about the joy of language.